40 acres roughly.
Okay. I think we're back, so
Sounds like a lot, I would say acreage.
let's try that.
All right, let's move on to the next slide, because we have a lot of questions on this one.
Yeah, good answer, though.
Next slide, please.
I'll,
Just page down.
yeah, no, I got that part, I'm trying. I mean, I'm bad, but I'm not that bad. Only one.
On this chart, the left side is better. On this chart, the left side is better than the right side, 10 parts per
Yeah,
million.
more oxygen is over here, less
Yeah.
over here,
Right,
less deep.
so kind of, yeah. Seems a little backwards.
Yeah. We always,
So we're pretty good.
in lake science, we like to put the depth with the 0 at the top.
Because the end of the year was better than any other time. Green.
Well, 628.
First and the last.
It had more at the surface, yeah,
Yeah.
but that's because there's more algae at the surface.
Also, it's windy too.
So,
Next one.
Okay, keep going. One back up, I think you gotta go up a little. Up, there we go, temperature. All right, so the reason all that oxygen is at the surface and not at the bottom, and why doesn't it mix? It's because you have temperature differences, so warmer water is less dense than cold water, so the warmer water sits at the top. So all summer long, you can see the temperature changes, but not until September and October, the blue and the green does the temperature at the surface and the bottom come out to be similar. And that's when the turnover is happening. So the lake actually will bring that deeper water up and then circulate the phosphorus from the bottom up to the top. So that's just a nice picture of what your lake does. This is the data we collect. Next slide.
Is that because we see the algae then coming up at that point? Between August, July and September?
Doesn't affect temperature.
It does the temperature affect the algae though?
No, well, it does. It affects the growth rate, the algae, but temperature, let's not get too deep into
Okay.
that yet.
Fine.
Water quality, so we're just running through the data that we collect for you folks. Here's the water quality in the lake itself. There's surface and bottom, each date, surface bottom, surface bottom, surface bottom. What you see is this is phosphorus. Surface total phosphorus is actually very good most dates, in fact, all dates. But the bottom gets kind of elevated, and that's because of this release of bottom water phosphorus. And you can see the dates, this is the surface oxygen and the bottom oxygen. They're 0.3 versus 7, big differences. And that's just, and if you do it as a percentage, it's 95% versus 1.6% concentration. It's just, there's no oxygen to breathe if you're a fish down there. But there's a lot of good data here. I won't go into it for the meeting. Next slide. So what are we seeing? This is 3 years into our study. What does it all mean? This is surface phosphorus. This is the stuff that affects the algae blooms, what you see on the lake when you're out there. And what you see is pretty much every month we're out there for the last 3 years, the surface is somewhere around 0.01 to 0.02. Perfect. That's where you want it. Except for this, what's going on with that, right? The first month we came out, 0.06. We're like, ooh, that's disgusting. Go to the next slide. Here's what was happening. Here's your inlet phosphorus. What comes in that inlet? That first month, the inlet was 0.07. Every other month, the inlet's been pretty good. But here's what your inlet is, 0.01 to 0.02, but your inlet comes in at 0.035, 0.035, 0.035 every once in a while. And those are likely storms. And then these lower numbers are the dry weather or bigger time difference between when it rained and when we got out there. So good data. Love to see trends. Trends help you understand what's happening. Next slide.
Was that a 12-month or the thing at the bottom was a year?
3 years.
3 years, so it was very high back in 2022.
Just for the very first month that we sampled. Okay, next slide is Secchi disc. Yeah, that's that disc I showed you at the beginning, how far down you can see. So 0 is at the surface. That same month, way back when the water was yucky, we actually could see far down into the lake. Because it wasn't causing a bloom, because it was still too early in the season, the water's kind of cold. The sun's not quite as intense. But as the season went on, you can see the clarity drops. So we went from 4.5 meters, which is 12, 13 feet down, you can see that little teeny disc on an end of a rope, to 2.5 meters, which is 6 feet, 12 feet, or 6, 7, 8 feet type of thing. And so what happens, and that's 1 year, and then this is the next year, I don't know why we connected that line, but basically you can see the next year starts out, same pattern. Next year starts out, same pattern, but this little W thing, that was an algae bloom. It was we went out the July 31st and we had a spike that's a little higher than what we would expect, given this trend. So you had a little something different going on this year than in previous years. But that's the trend, and what you also see is clarity is decreasing slightly over time. If you look at that chart, it's not getting better, it's not getting much worse, but I'd rather it go the other way. Next slide. So here's that algae bloom I talked about on July 31st, at the deep spot in the lake. It was a blue-green algae bloom. About 25% of the algae that we collected was blue-green algae. Every other month we go out, it's 4, 5, 3, 4, 5, 14. But for the most part, we weren't seeing a drop in clarity due to blue-green algae. It's other species of algae that are causing it, which is good. And these don't cause toxins and no problem. So blue-green algae are the one we actually worry about. They're not actually even algae. This is data on the zooplankton that eat the algae. And one of the things that I've pointed out is just some of these bigger copepods are pretty common or abundant, and so having those in your lake are good. It's good forage for your fish, and it's good they graze down on that algae. Next slide. Plant mapping results. There's some plants on a rake. We use a rake, we throw it out, we pull it in, we take a look, and we also look through the surface. Next slide. These are the data that we have. There's 2 types of data here. Coverage, which is what area of the bottom is covered. So red means 75% to 100% of the bottom is full of plants. The green means 1 to 25% of the lake is covered with plants. So an area this big, 25% of it is covered, it gets green. And if it has no plants, we don't show anything. So that's how that coverage is done. This is biovolume, and that's a little different to explain, but it's how high in the water column the plant is growing. How much of the volume of water is filled with aquatic plant. So the numbers are gonna be lower than the coverage. The coverage is gonna have plants, but they could be this tall, or they could be 6 feet tall. And so this tells you there's certain areas where it gets very tall and where it's yellow, but the green is where it's lower growing or the water's just deep. So if you have a 2-foot tall plant that only grows 2 feet tall and it's in 2 feet of water, it fills the water column. But if it's in 12 feet of water, it's not a problem. It's not filling the water column. It's not creating issues for swimming and boating. Well, also 31 acres or 11% of the lake is what's mapped as covered with aquatic plants. Next slide. So the other good story on your lake, as you know, is there are no exotics yet. We didn't find any this year either. The bigger, more abundant plants, the clasping leaf pondweed, is prevalent. It's native.
Annoying. It's annoying.
Yeah, well, one of the things about what you've got is the pondweeds, as you know, drop seeds. That's how they reproduce. And so when you draw the lake down, it prevents things like a milfoil or a fanwort or one of those species that are not good to have from being in your lake, because they don't produce by seed. So drawing it down dries them out, freezes them out, and they don't take hold. So even if you had some invasive plants like a fanwood or a milfoil taking hold in the lake because some boat brought it in, it wouldn't stay because you're drawing the lake down 6 feet, which is beyond the depth that most of the plants are growing. But the plants that return the following year are the ones that drop the seeds the prior year. Like, so they drop seeds this summer, you draw it down, the seeds are still there. Then you fill it back up and the seeds are ready to go. So that's what's happening in the pondweeds. Big leaf pondweed, clasping leaf pondweed, thin leaf pondweed, even water celery, all drop seeds. So they actually are stimulated by a drawdown. So, because the drawdown encourages their growth at the detriment of the plants that don't drop seeds or have a harder time, like lilies and some of these others have either tubers or root structures that survive the winter even with the drawdown, and then they can grow back. But so there's a little bit of dynamic going on here. It's not bad. All good quality plants. It's sort of what you want to be seeing. So next slide.
Question, even the ones that drop seeds, even if we didn't draw down, they still be dropping.
Yes, sir. Yep. Then we looked at sediment. This is the first year we looked at the sediment. We took 3 grab samples from around the deep hole, which is the area where that phosphorus recirculation is happening, and looked at the phosphorus concentration. We had 1,550 milligrams per kilogram, and that doesn't mean anything to you unless you look at sort of what's typical. 600 to 800 is typical. So you're about double what you should have. That doesn't mean it's bad, it just means that it's elevated, you know? So the lake I grew up on, we did this same test, it was 4,000, so. And it's a very nice lake too, so it's a function of what's there, you wanna know it, so you know, can we do something about it, or should we do something about it? And this is something you might check in 5 years or 10 years to see if it's getting worse, but you won't check it every year. Because it's not gonna change significantly over time. It just will increase slowly. Next slide. Stormwater, this will be fun. So we went out in the spring, the sampling consisted of water sampling at 10 storm drains. And the lake's main inlet during the rain event, which is something different than we had been doing. We also took bacteria samples, at Erdoney Road, as well as Woodland Terrace storm drain. And these are the results. E. coli was above the state standard at Woodland Terrace, but not Erdoney. Total coliforms were very high. So you've got a lot of bacteria, but not E. coli, which, I don't know how good you feel about it, but it's what you got.
What's the state standard?
State standard is like, 235, I believe. It's in one of the next slides.
Is that one of our storm drains pictured there?
Yeah.
Which one is?
Is that what-
Woodland Terrace,
that is
Warrior
I was
Golf,
gonna say Woodland
It's
Terrace.
not Erdoney,
then it's Woodland.
it's probably Woodland. I don't know, I sent you a ton of pictures.
Here's the result from all of the storm drains we assessed. Sorry. As you can see, there's a bunch. Dissolved phosphorus and total phosphorus of the first 2 columns. Anything that's red is really problematic. Anything that's pink is like higher than we'd like it to be. It's not helping your lake. The good news is nitrogen is not a big problem. And so nitrogen, anything where total nitrogen's above 1 is where you start to say, okay, that's got some influence from septics, or it's got some influence from wildlife or waste. And you had one that was 2.87, and that was kind of like the dirty one, kind of all the time. But others have just at 1 or just above 1 slightly. This one was at 2. So you got some issues, but it's not cleaning bad, and the lake itself doesn't have high nitrogen levels, so it's not influenced in the lake in the end. But we have all the data here, and it's got flow data as well. I don't think it's on this chart, but yeah, it's discharge. So the thing to keep in mind is, and unfortunately, this one, the flow was so much, we didn't actually get an actual flow. But you can see, this is 8 cubic feet per second at the end. Only 0.02 cubic feet per second, so that much water every second, very small amount. So that's something to keep in mind. When you see these big numbers, they look scary, but when there's a small flow, it's less of an impact on your overall lake. So when we do stormwater management, we prioritize the sites. We either say, well, we're gonna fix them all, or we say, well, which ones are putting out the most discharge? Like this is 0.36, 0.28, and this is 1.22 Lake Road. And this one's dirty and good flow. Let's see what we can do about that as far as addressing it.
Is the Lake Road one the town beach? Or are they separate?
Separate. It's,
Which one's Lake Road?
Lake Road comes off the path. When you come down, from Utley Pond, go past Erdoney, we collect it at, across the street from 81 Lake Road, Pond. Where,
Where the driveway always washes
yeah,
out.
where the driveway always washes out.
Tom Collins house.
Yeah.
That
You know, Tom Collins.
Where
I know
Street house.
flow rate for
Erdoney.
Stony Road Dike is the where it's a place to concentrate on.
The town
That's
beach.
got a flow rate that's
The town
too
beach.
much to measure.
Correct.
Well, it was a
The
lot
town
of
beach
flow.
is next to Eden's. Carl, is this data cumulative and averaged out over all year, or is this the latest?
I think that's from the spring sampling alone,
Oh,
so it doesn't
right.
have all our data.
So you don't,
All our data will be as part of our final report that we're preparing, but we just got back the data from the October sample, and we've got another round to do.
correct me if I'm wrong, I thought in our monthly report
start near our houses.
that we had E. coli issues at both Woodland and two Erdoney's.
Yes,
That
you,
Eastern Highlands, our
you
health
did,
agent had to get involved with.
you did, but the data that I had just showed one of them is from the spring sample was high.
Oh, okay, so, but since then, we've had,
So none of these are bacteria.
okay.
Next slide. So this is the results from the fall stormwater sampling. So we're still waiting for the results from the November 2020 storm sampling we did. We have more storm sampling planned when the conditions are right. The bacteria sampling was conducted in August and November. The August bacteria results at the storm drains were elevated and above state standards of 235. No bacteria detected at the in-lake samples in the vicinity of the storm drain. So
This is the data we sent.
that's the data, yeah, that was probably in that report. What you can see is E. coli is at 748
Four
and
times.
496. So both of those were high, and this is the summer fall sample. The last was the spring.
Right.
Okay,
So it's the same, virtually the same as it was with the reds, is where the difficulty is on
yeah,
that.
that's a
Yeah.
good way to look at it.
Did we, from the last storm, when Sophie or James came out, get E. coli again at Erdoney and Woodland Terrace, which? was
In
fall?
November, yeah,
Okay,
we just
I'm
don't have.
curious, oh, you don't have it yet?
it.
Okay.
Still waiting.
Well, thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
I have to read it.
That's okay. It's
Minor
like-
detail.
Next slide, please.
It's the top of the, Turidoni is
that from
on top of the street.
Two Erdoney are rental properties.
Oh, your Englerts.
Yeah, the
Rental
corner.
properties,
Yeah.
two
Do
Erdoney.
they dump,
Try not to mention people.
do they dump into the inlet? Where does that come out?
They dump about, I guesstimate 10, 20, 30 feet from the inlet. And
Into the inlet.
there is a concern from the inlet.
Yeah.
And in the lake, there's probably about maybe 40 to 50 foot, and then that drain is there. And that drain has been draining some really murky crud on occasion, which is a
Nice.
concern. and high E. coli.
So it's in that little cove that goes
Yeah.
up.
Yep, yep, like where the ducks go,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay.
So we do have some remaining tasks, including finalizing the year-end report with all the lab results once they come in. There's 2 additional rounds of bacteria sampling at the 2 storm drains of concern and the inlet that'll occur. I guess we're gonna push those till 2025. And then phosphorus sampling for inputs at the inlet. So
And your reason for pushing is because we've been in a drought.
been in a drought.
And this
So
has to be
we had
done.
hoped to get some of these samples done in
Right.
July and August, and it just pretty much once July came, it stopped raining. And when it did rain, it was like not enough to
Not enough
create
to-
runoff that you could
Right.
actually sample.
Crowd absorbed.
Next slide. Please.
Yeah, no, it's,
It's gonna make you go through the whole thing again.
one last plane.
You can't pause too long, if it locks up on us.
Which picture is that, you know?
There. See it better, Donnie?
No, that's not River County.
Oh, where is
Didn't you say that was Woodland there?
That could be over by Lake Astawana and Lily Pad Pond.
Ah.
Tom's,
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
yeah.
So one other piece that is different from prior years, is we were asked to look at the deep water release from the outlet as a way of reducing that phosphorus at the bottom water, and in the bottom water. So that's like I say, there's about 30 acres of bottom water, and so the question is, well, if it's a method for reducing phosphorus, is it worth doing? And so we took a look at that. As you know, phosphorus is released from the sediment when the water is anoxic. The bottom's anoxic from May through October for about 6 months. The anoxia occurs from right around 6 meters, which is 20 feet, down to 8 meters, which is the deepest we could find. Approximately 30 acres are deeper than 20, but we don't have any detailed bathymetry data on the lake. So we're kind of estimating, based on some of the measurements we take. The annual phosphorus load to the lake, just as a key thing to keep in mind, is about 200, it's actually like 202 kilograms of phosphorus per year come into the lake. So we want to know how much of that will be removed if we do a bottom release. So next slide. So this is bottom release, and this is not my graphic, so it's kind of sketchy looking, but there's the upper layer and the bottom layer, the epilimnion and the hypolimnion, and if you put a siphon down to the deep water over the dam, you can basically siphon the water from the bottom, that nutrient-rich water, over the dam and out to draw your lake down. Or just to keep an ongoing release of water from the lake to the downstream all during the summer when that lake is stratified. So what does that help? What does that mean? What does it get us? Well, if you take 30 acres and figure out how many square feet and how many cubic feet, you can calculate it into liters. How many liters of water is down at the bottom? And then we know the bottom water phosphorus, this is the average over the 6 months, it's 0.0235. And in the top, it was 0.014. So the difference between those is how much you'll gain by releasing that bottom water to the downstream. And when you do that and do the math, at that many liters, at that many milligrams in each liter, it gives you that many kilograms of phosphorus. Which is nice. Next slide. What does that mean? Well, if you release 2 kilograms of phosphorus, that's 1% of your annual load out of the 202 kilograms that are in your lake or coming in every year. So you would basically gain 1% or improve water by 1%. Which is better than just releasing surface water. All things being equal, but I wouldn't rely on the approach entirely for meeting your goals of maintaining or improving water clarity over time. So it's a nice approach. It doesn't generally cost much in that it's essentially a couple of PVC tubes.
This
But
is the pipe at the bottom of the dam?
No,
This was a recommendation. No, but we used to have
Yes,
a pipe at the bottom of the dam.
And
And
that's,
then when they rebuilt the dam, they took it away.
correct.
So this would.
If you had a gate valve that allowed you to just open the water and release from the bottom, then it would be worth doing. You just turn that valve and out goes the bad water and you keep the good water in. Everyone's happy. But because you don't have that option, the best option you have is putting a siphon in, which is, we work with a lake up in Lunenburg, Mass. They have 6 PVC tubes that are about 4 inches in diameter. That go out into their deep water in the lake, over the dam and down the other side. And they have valves on the outlet, so they close them, fill the tubes with water. Close the fills, open the spigots, and out goes the water, and it just runs all summer long, and that's how they release water to the downstream, which they're required to do as part of their operation of their dam. It's a nice strategy, and they did it because the people around the lake said, we can do this, that's a Home Depot project, we'll do it. They needed to get the permit and everything else to do that, that was part of their, they went and got their own permit, so it didn't cost them a lot of money.
What percent did they pull out of phosphorus?
They didn't even ask me to calculate it, because they just were like, that's a good idea, we'll do it. So, because it, like I say, it's not gonna hurt, it only helps. How much it helps, it's probably similar, it's probably 1 to 2% of their load.
If you took all those liters out.
Yeah.
Can you translate that to how many inches of surface water we would, lose? I mean, is this gonna be negligible and so not noticeable on the surface?
We have water going over the surface now, right?
Yeah,
No.
usually for a month, but, you
Depends.
know, we did this year and maybe
Yeah, I
the year
didn't-
before, but
didn't do
most of the
those
time,
counts.
we get negative. You know,
Yeah, no, I didn't do the calculations, and you can do the calculations by just figuring out head and how much head pressure and the
A
size of
6-inch pipe isn't gonna.
the size of the pipes, it's a negligible amount of water, but it has, you wanna do it so that you're removing enough to make a difference.
Mhm.
But the lake's being fed by stream, it's being fed by groundwater, and so there's water coming in.
Yeah, but
It's a matter of,
we do lose volume, we do lose depth,
especially this year.
well.
This year we did.
No, we
This
didn't.
year we're better than, we're many times
Well,
we're down 8 to 10 inches.
So it's dry year.
yeah, we
So-
kept it, but we also made a decision to go 2 inches higher than typical of our
Oh.
spillway to try to keep, from
Get ahead of it.
stagnation. And, I don't know if it was you or Bob Cortman or both who told us that to minimize stagnation and keep water flowing would help to minimize
Yeah.
algae blooms.
Yes.
So.
How fast,
science.
how fast does the phosphate get bound up again once the anoxic bottom changes back to having oxygen down there?
I never put pipe.
Pretty quick. Because phosphorus is always going down to the bottom from the surface, all that dead algae every year settles and brings phosphorus with it.
So if we don't.
Before, let me save some of the questions to the end, because I wanna
Yeah,
get
we're
word.
running over.
Way past.
Yeah, way past.
Next slide, I'm rounding it out here.
Okay.
So this is just where we stand, big picture. Water clarity is worse if you're up here. You're currently down at 202. You're not gonna see big problems until you get above 240 kilograms per year. And then, once you're up here, it's gonna be bad all the time. So you're still where you wanna be. You're at a good area, with regard to nutrient loading. So reducing or keeping it at its current level is going to keep your water at its current level. It won't get worse. But if you let more, if you don't fix the storm drains, if you don't address some of the loading that you see, they may not get worse, but that accumulation at the bottom of the lake continues to get worse over time, because you've got dirty water coming in and not dirty water going out. And you're gonna, over time, lose that balance. And it will just, the internal loading will start to creep this up. And as you go up, now you see very few algae bloom problems that shut the lake down. You get up here, you're gonna have a week or two where you're not gonna be able to swim. It'll do too green. And once you get up here, you really won't wanna swim. It's too gross. So that's the big picture. That's what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to keep you down in the clean area. Next slide. getting close. Over half your phosphorus is coming from stormwater. So the internal loading is. It's happening, but it might be 10 or 15% of your problem. Phosphorus is, the stormwater is the bigger issue. Next slide. So recommendations, continue to monitor and track algae and nutrients, which you've been doing. You could probably cut back on the nitrogen monitoring if you wanted to save lab costs. Because for the 3 years we've been doing it, we've never seen nitrogen in the lake to be a problem. And we're looking at nitrate, nitrite, or nitrate, TKN and total nitrogen, and even if you just did it once a year, you'd probably be fine, save a lot of money. You need to address the storm drain discharges, they're just not gonna get better, so that's something to work on. Continue to limit the development, you have good protocols in place to manage developed land, with good stormwater best management practices, that's as properties change hands or get redeveloped, those management procedures for stormwater continue to improve. The land management of the internal phosphorus load with an alum treatment is an option for the internal load. I wouldn't recommend it now, but sometime in the future, if you don't address the stormwater, you're gonna have to do something within lake management of those nutrients that have built up over time. It's not excessively weedy, but continue to monitor those weeds. The key is finding the new exotics should they come in. It's a lot easier to handful or remove them if you find them early. If they get in there and no one sees them and then you've got 20 acres of it, it's a lot more expensive to deal with, or you have to deal with herbicides. So control the invasives if you get them. Not excessively mucky, a lot of the area is gravelly or sandy, which is a result of the drawdown that you're doing that sort of coarsens the substrates. So that helps control some of the plant growth and certainly skews the types of plants that would be able to grow. So continue with the winter drawdowns, that's still recommended. Next slide. And that's that, I guess.
Thank you.
Now we can hit some questions if you will.
Quick question on pondweed. Drops the seeds, so when's the best time to pull it? If you were,
Before those seeds drop,
right, which is when?
usually July, you can get in there before July and get them.
So when do they reach maximum growth?
They are right around late August, they drop their seeds.
But they grow quickly in spring, so by June.
Oh, June,
Early
you'll
July.
see them everywhere in June, yeah, and July.
And if you pull them then, they won't regrow back? Or?
They won't regrow back, but the seeds that they drop will generate
Well, that's
next
it.
year.
But if you pull them before they seed, drop seed.
So here's the trick.
That's what I'm looking
Yeah.
for.
Can I finish the trick?
Yes.
Okay, so the trick is,
The tricky answer.
think about the seeds, the plant drops hundreds of seeds every year. Out of those hundreds, a quarter might germinate next year. The other 75% are still in the seed bank, they call it, the soil or the sediment. So you pick all the weeds, and then you come back the next year and there's more weeds. You're not growing the weeds that were dropped from the ones you picked, you're growing them from the ones from the year before that dropped that hadn't germinated. So you have to keep hitting that area. So, and it would work whether you're hand picking, raking, herbicides, no matter what, when you're dealing with a pondweed, you get regrowth from that seed bank.
Seeds last that long.
So what happens when we find that you do management, you wipe out 100% of the clasping leaf pondweed in front of your dock. Right, you go in there with a rake, you get it all nice, you're happy, and then the next year you get back, instead of being 100% coverage, you now have 50% coverage. Still there, but not as bad. So then you rake those out in July before they regrow. And you're like, oh, next year you might have 25% or 30%, but better. And each year it will get better and better over time. With the exception of the areas you don't rake still drop seeds. So there's some movement of seeds that land on the surface and float.
The seeds last year after year? They'll
They can last 5 or 6 years, yeah, in the soil.
Can you kill the seeds?
Well, you can kill the plant,
But now we have drawdown,
Herbicides.
the seeds are exposed. Some-
seeds don't really get affected by the drawdown.
And frankly, even with our drawdown, we're not seeing that. We're right at the edge of where that probably is growing. I walk around now and still the water, I can see it dead. Go ahead, then.
What's the impact of breaking now? So we've had the drawdown.
Nothing. It looks nice.
You're gonna spread your seeds.
Wow,
Is that potential or?
not really. I mean, the seeds that are dropped, and so you're removing organics from the bottom of the lake. and
Just
if you-
yuck.
It's muck. If you take that and put it in and compost it in the upland, then you've eliminated that source of nutrient from the lake, which is incrementally helpful. But it's not gonna reduce your plant growth by taking weeds out naturally.
Cause that's, I think the tendency that, people wanna be able to do something while the water's not there and you can see the weeds.
Mhm.
If you walk around the lake right
Yeah.
now, you can see the
See 'em.
weeds, so I've already watched somebody doing exactly that, they break their whole.
Yeah, and I
Right.
certainly think it would help over. It reduces the biomass and the regrowth, you're pulling out whatever roots or plants that are there that might. Have regrown, not from seed, but from the roots that are still wet and not dead from being drained.
So not harmful to
Not
do that,
No,
but not necessarily gonna.
you're not having a lot of bang for your buck effort wise.
Again, not that. Carl,
All right,
Greg,
who's next?
oh,
You're next, you're,
me.
Mary?
You know Greg Bugsby,
Yeah,
has suggested if we were to use lake rakes,
yeah,
to do it more in the April-May period. His thinking is the seeds are already gone or not ready to. I'm just
I mean,
trying to find the best time
it
for us
doesn't-
to educate people.
It certainly wouldn't hurt, I mean, basically what you're trying to do is cut back biomass, so the stuff that's at the, like, you go out there in. February, there's plants at the bottom of your lake, they're not gone, so. But they can't really grow because there's not enough light getting to the bottom and they're not warm, the water's not warm, so they're not really in full growth mode. But if you get out in April and May, it's very hard to find the plants because they're still very small. And a lake rake. There's different types of lake rakes, so there's some that just cut the plants off. And that's fine, it just cuts them, and if you keep doing it, they never get to the level where they can drop the seeds. The seeds from the Potamogetans tend to be, you see them emerge from the lake. They have like a little floret that
Yeah.
comes above the surface in August, typically September, early September, but you'll see them. So once you get to that stage, you're too late. So if you can get them before they emerge from the surface, you
So
have
when we start to see them.
nothing has. They have to pollinate, they have to basically pollinate the viable seeds to drop, so as long as you get them before they break the surface. You're in a winning situation.
Second question, Dr. Bugsby has suggested that benthic blankets will temporarily. If you put them in April, May for a 6 to 8 week period of time and then remove them temporarily, pause the growth and you'll get through a recreational season. And he's done this, I forget where, at one lake in Connecticut as an experiment and it worked that way. But the clasping pondweed will come back, but it gets people through the recreationals. Would you recommend benthic blankets?
Benthic blankets are a fine solution on a limited basis, so
Pretty
that's,
much what he said.
yeah, so like. They're not a lake-wide solution, so you're always gonna have, if. You and 3 of your neighbors all do it, that shoreline will be less likely to have weed growth. If you do it and this neighbor doesn't, and this neighbor does, you're gonna still get weeds being spread by the neighbor that doesn't do it, it's just.
And his experiment was on a town beach only.
Yeah,
It's regulated. by
yeah,
the
and a
town.
lot of places, I work for state parks, and the state parks will put out benthic barriers. They roll them out in big sheets, and then they cover them with sand, and that basically prevents. The roots from actually going through the barrier, they might have this
Right.
much sand on top of the barrier just to hold it down. And that's an approach that works where you don't have boat traffic and things like that. Once you put it around a dock where there's a boat and a prop, it tends to push the material around and it can be a difficult. It's a lot of work to maintain a bottom barrier, so to do it right, to get it installed properly, to, maintain it. And they're a tool, they're not a, they're one tool among many.
Yeah.
You had a question?
Yeah, basically, it would look like the best place to spend money is on, to get the maximum return for the dollar is doing something with the phosphate and potentially bacteria in the storm drains.
That would be a good first, yeah, good forward step.
Yeah, but how do you solve the storm draining phosphate?
So there's all sorts of ways to fix storm drains, yeah, there's hundreds of ways.
Get into that tonight.
Yeah, so.
Just give us a.
And so there's all sorts of ways. The biggest thing that you can do, or one of the things you can do is education. If it's just what's in the water, you look at the drain and the area that drains to that drain. What's happening there? Is it animal waste, yard fertilizers? Is it natural wetlands will produce phosphorus as the plants decay? They just release phosphorus, it's nothing bad, it's just natural, but they're a source, and so you can start to go through and see what you have. There's things from education and fixing the sources, like if it's a manure pile or a yard waste pile that's down by the storm drain or the tributary that the storm drain produces that's generating the numbers that you're seeing. But bacteria come from animals, they don't come from yard waste. So you've got high bacteria, there's animals causing something to go wrong with the water. It's animal pet waste, it's septic, it's something that's generating those bacteria. It could be beavers, it could be, it doesn't have to be necessarily something
Chemical.
like a pig farm. It can be something a little less obvious, but a beaver in a drainage that has small flow is gonna give you high numbers. One raccoon living in a storm drain is gonna give you a high number. We had a storm drain full of bats. It was a big storm drain, but there were bats living all inside. And that's what was caught, the guano was dropping into the pipe. And they would get high numbers. So, but that's stuff that you can do by the storm drain sampling that we're testing. It helps us understand what the sources may be. You can go the next step, which is eDNA or DNA source typing, where you actually look and say, what are these bacteria coming from? Animal, avian, like is it a goose, is it a deer, is it a dog, is it a beaver?
Is it a horse?
Is it a horse? And you can actually speciate those bacteria from the guts of the different animals.
So if you quickly said to Erdoni, which is one of our bad ones, how much animal or septic waste would you guess would be contributing to that high number? Could it just be one beaver?
No, probably not for that volume of water,
Is it
but
a pile of manure?
yeah, probably something like that.
Or septic systems.
Or septic system.
So soil samples?
No, well, so with the DNA bacteria testing, you can, for about $2,000 worth of lab fee, $3,000 worth of lab fee, you can speciate the bacteria and say 20% of it is human and 80% of it is horse.
Okay.
You would get that type of an answer.
It's coming from somewhere.
But then you still have to do something about it.
No,
You still have to figure out and if you know there's a big pile of horse manure there, that's probably better than going and speciating your bacteria.
Yeah.
Like, there's things you can do, and so moving the manure pile or managing whatever's
But if
there.
nothing's obvious, then you can do that.
Then you do that type of testing and it will give you some answers. The other thing is, there's end of pipe solutions, which can remove the pollutants as the storm drain is coming in, so you're not fixing the source, but you're cleaning it or filtering it or capturing the nutrient and the sediment and the phosphorus before it gets to the lake. Some of those work really well for phosphorus and not very well for bacteria or vice versa. So you have to know what's the problem and do you need to do more than one thing to solve the problem? And in some of those drains you will.
Well, our problem is mostly phosphorus. From what I see.
Phosphorus is what's affecting the lake water quality, and it's not, you know, the less phosphorus you have in the lake, the cleaner the lake will be and stay.
But we have double coming in, which then what's going out.
And the bacteria is not, you know, as we did our testing, we sampled the drains and they were dirty and above, you know, they're not acceptable. But when you go out into the lake in the vicinity where the drains dump, it's enough dilution that you're not in risk of getting sick from swimming in that water.
At this moment.
Do you want to? I wouldn't go out swimming in front of a storm drain after a rain event. If I had a choice, but, you know, that's the type of information that's useful and. The phosphorus can be removed. Anything you do to infiltrate stormwater through the ground removes phosphorus. So a septic system removes phosphorus. A faulty septic system doesn't remove phosphorus. So a septic system that has fissures and cracks and has not been constructed properly, not been maintained properly, where it's not pumped out routinely, the ground between the septic system and the lake over time gets saturated with phosphorus, so that the phosphorus just keeps blowing through at some point. But if you have clean soil between a good functioning septic system and the lake, the phosphorus gets bound to that soil and doesn't pass through to the lake. It's when the septic system is very close to the lake or it hasn't been maintained in that leach field and the distribution between the system and the lake is saturated, then you have problems. So there's a lot that can be done.
Is there a way to pinpoint a specific septic system that might be failing?
Yeah. There's a whole bunch of things that can be done, so the question is can you get access to that system? And so it's typically a Board of Health thing or a,
Exactly.
you know, there's dye, where you put dyes, you flush a dye tablet in and you measure out whether it's coming through to the lake. There's less direct things that we do, which are groundwater seepage surveys, where we'll go out in front of a shoreline of the lake. So that, like, there might be 8 or 10 houses along this hillside, we'll go down into the shoreline of the lake and collect water that's not just from one person, but from the area. Collect samples, send it to a lab, and we compare that to the background. An area that has fewer homes or no homes, and say, well, what are we getting background and what are we getting from this shoreline versus these 6 other shorelines? Which ones are bad and how bad are they? And that tells you, you know, with real data, that we have a septic problem or we don't have a septic problem.
Now that you have 3 years of baseline data, is it time to step up that next level of analysis?
You can do so much analysis that you're not solving the problems that you've already identified. So like, you know that more than half your phosphorus load is coming from stormwater. And there's probably 10 or 15% coming from internal recycling. The balance is coming from direct rain to the lake, which you can't fix. It's the quality it is. And it's the groundwater. So there might be 10 or 20% or 15% of the problem with groundwater. So we could assess groundwater and then now know groundwater is a problem, but it's still only 15% of the problem. Let's focus on the storm. We know the storm drain.
Is it time to focus on the storm? Because that's the next level
It is.
of what we need to do.
Sorry, he had his hand up.
How much does fertilizer affect this?
It does, so it affects the quality of the water going into the storm drains. The fertilizer actually goes through the ground and into the lake eventually.
Groundwater as well as.
Groundwater, yep, and then runoff. from just people's lawns.
So, and that's around the lake and the watershed area.
Yeah, the nice thing is that over time, there's been, like Massachusetts bans fertilizer with phosphorus. So you can't buy fertilizer with phosphorus.
The same as true in Connecticut.
So if that's true in Connecticut, then you have, people are putting nitrogen on their lawn, but no phosphorus. So because of this type of issue, so that's a good thing.
Farms. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so farms, you have another question?
Yeah, you had mentioned on some storm drains, you could put a filter, but they're either good for phosphorus or they're good for bacteria, vice versa type thing. But for a septic tank, you have one outlet going out, do they make a phosphorus filter? For something?
No, I mean, basically, if you've got a septic tank that's a problem, you need to basically drain, pump and rebuild or replace.
No, I'm not saying that it would be a problem, I'm saying, because obviously you get a lot of natural phosphorus from a septic tank. And the fields do absorb it, right, if it's working well, but is there a way to limit it or, you know, slow it down so your fields last twice as long type thing? I mean, you already have a filter in
No,
most tanks right now.
The cheapest thing to do is pump it out every year.
Yeah.
If you pump it out every year, it's not going to the lake.
Gotcha.
So you have a tank, there's a tank in the septic system before it gets to the leach field, and the leach field only happens when the tank's full and leaching.
Most people do 2, 3, 4 years.
Some people never.
Not
So-
everybody has a septic system.
Some people are like, I have to do that.
Right.
So if you do it annually, that solves the problem for most septic tanks, and it's $200 to pump a tank. 250.
Yeah, through.
Not anymore.
Is it that much now?
We just got it done the other day.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I get mine done up I'm in Woodstock, Connecticut, we're in the woods, so it's cheaper. It's
Yeah.
$225, and they dig the hole.
Oh, my God. I want your
I know, right?
I want your guy.
What company is that?
I'm not telling.
He just got.
Keep busy.
Every year?
So are we all set? Question line, we're good?
That was very good.
Thank you very
All
much.
right, well,
Thank you.
This will be on our,
yeah, I left a copy of the presentation on that.
It's right on.
I have it here if you need it, I'll
Yeah,
send
that's
it to you,
great.
but it's really large, so if you can get it off of that,
okay,
you'd be better served. It won't email.
we'll have Jennifer send it.
Yeah.
Or put it on thumb drive.
Yep.
All right.
Carol, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you so
everyone.
much.
Merry
Next
Christmas.
year.
Happy holidays.
All right, minutes of last meeting,
Before we go on the agenda, we need to amend the agenda to include an executive.
we'll
That's
stay,
it.
we're already at an hour, that was supposed to be 15 minutes, you know.
Well, but we have to amend the agenda at the beginning, even if we don't get to it, okay?
Okay, fair
So
enough.
I'd like to amend the agenda to be able to consider a memorandum that has been delivered to us by the House Legal Counsel.
Okay,
And the exception.
all right. Thank you. So,
Motion?
Yeah, I make a motion.
Second.
second, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so moved. Minutes of last meeting, do we have any adjustments?
Yes, there were people that were either not here or weren't added to the, either absent or excused, I don't know. Robert, were you here? Bob, were you here last month?
I don't think so.
No.
And Jim, you weren't here
I
last,
was.
you were here last month, okay.
You're on mute, Bob.
Ladies, are you leaving? Yeah, thank you. If you could just say your name and address before you go, just so we have it for the record.
Yeah. Well, no,
Thank you,
Yeah,
Thank you, Ann.
Judy Preston, 5 Lake Lane.
thank you. Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thanks, Judy.
All right.
Lake Road. Who's hours? Lakewoods Lane?
Lakewoods Lane, yes.
Lakewoods Lane, okay, that's what you guys
We're
are.
going into executive session.
All right, All right, so any other adjustments to the minutes?
No,
No, motion to accept with, move to accept from that copy. And, second? Second, okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. Bob, was that an opposition or an abstention?
That was an acceptance.
Okay, thank you. All right,
Are you going to do executive session now?
no. Yeah, okay, all right, and, just naming the,
Frank Gifford, 16 Ardoni.
thank you.
Yep.
Wait, and just in time, name and address for the,
Oh, John Dilworth, 8, Woodland Terrace, Columbia.
okay. Do you want to still be on the Zoom?
No, you can hang up. Actually, I came here like a quarter of the door was locked, so I thought, oh, this was gonna be a Zoom meeting, so when I got Zoom, then it was on Zoom.
Oh,
Sorry
sorry.
to hear. Anyway, thank you for your diligence.
Yeah. All right, I did report you when I, the agent. All right, thank you. All right, any communications? I'd like to just move to a speed dating, version of our meeting. What are the most important items that we need to take care of?
we have one permit review that needs to be reviewed and, advised the board's staffing.
Okay. And, all right, so when we get right into that.
Oh, now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is speed
This
dating,
is
come on.
Okay. A little tired today. On October 28th, we received an application for Monica Masaki and David Fusco, 134 Route 87. They are asking for a proposal to have their new second dock approved. And this was a dock that we spoke of in August that Isabel Kislik from Wetlands had already sent them a warning letter of some sort, because the dock had been placed without any wetlands and or Lmac and or Board of Selectmen advice, permit, and or approval. So, bottom line, when we did the site visit, this is the second dock, and as you see in one of the pictures, the original dock that has some, probably in need of some cosmetic changes because it's concrete and it's cracking. Is there, and it's a 6'8", so I'm sorry because I said 8 foot, it's 6 foot 8 inch times 30 feet, which is about 205 square feet. That dock currently exists. They have not been putting their boats or jet skis there because they felt that there may be some structural issues. And I made some recommendations to them to contact people who have fixed docks on this lake, i.e. Bob Powell and Chip Schifrin, with very similar concrete facilities, because I don't think there's a structural issue. The cut to the chase on their second dock. The dock is an easy dock. It is 3 5x10 plastic, I don't know the correct term. I have information here that they provided on the easy dock. It is placed very quickly on the lake. Kind of like augers, and then it floats up and down. The bottom line of this dock is that it exceeds our standard guidelines of a second, or of any dock now, being at 100 square feet. It's at 150 square feet. With these 3 5x10 structures. So in speaking with them, very lovely Monica, their reason for doing that was to have the jet skis in their boat there. The end of the dock is perpendicular, it's V-shaped, so as you can see in the pictures, that's where they put their boat currently. I did speak with them about their boat with fenders, because there's fenders on their concrete dock, could be placed at their concrete dock. And with cosmetic changes, if they chose, I gave her the names of the two people who have worked on the lake on concrete docks to help them. She did text me last night that she felt that that was an issue, that if they removed and were in compliance of 100 square feet on the second dock, that they wouldn't be able to put their boats or jet skis there. I think you can see in the final picture, the jet skis would fit on a 100, or on a 100 square foot dock of 20 feet by 5 feet. The boat would probably have to go back to their original concrete dock.
Up until this year, they had both.
Excuse me?
Up until this year, when they put the dock in, they had the boat and the jet skis at the cement dock.
At the cement dock? Oh, I wasn't aware of that. Thank you,
Yes.
Henry.
Because of
So,
water depth, Mary, excuse me?
No.
no, there's no water depth issue at all over there, and I went over and stuck in the kayak.
It's one of the
My
deeper
kayak
locations.
channel.
Yeah.
So, bottom line is, they did not go through, Lmac and wetlands, so we have to make a recommendation to the board of, advise the board of selectmen. It does exceed the allowable size of 100 square feet. It would be an allowed dock because they have over 130, lake frontage, a foot of lake frontage. It is exactly 25 feet from the abutting neighbor. But in a casual conversation with the budding neighbor, who, they said that the way, because it comes in perpendicular, that the motorboat, when it comes in perpendicular on that last piece that is over 100 square feet, is a potential safety issue because it's going into the swimming area of the abutting neighbor. It's legal at 25 feet from the property line, but because it's coming in perpendicular, most of us come in parallel, there are some issues that potentially it could be harmful for swimming. So, bottom line, last page, I think the recommendation from the subcommittee is that Lmac advised the Board of Selectmen to approve the submitted permit application with a reduction of the second dock from 3 5 by 10 square feet sections to 2 5 by 10 square feet sections for a total of 100 square feet per our standard guidelines. And they have to go through Isabel Chisholm at least, or wetlands, to get their permitting approval. And wetlands typically will do what we suggest. There's a motion on the table.
I think I have a question.
Aaron?
If they do a T at the end, so even if they keep 2 and they only go out 10 feet, which they potentially could, I think that the T has to be at the 25 foot thing, not just the 25 foot at the base of the dock, but it ought to go out straight, so it ought to become a T with an
25
L.
feet from, and that's a good point, because when that opens in perpendicular, the potential may be there. I do not know, they were gonna, one of them.
I'm sorry, I didn't follow what Henry was
So
suggesting.
if you look at this picture,
Yeah.
it's a T. And if at the shoreline, if that's 25 feet from the neighbor, but you walk out the dock, it sticks into that 25 feet by a couple of feet.
By probably 22 feet instead of 25 feet, right, so it's closer to.
The T is closer to the-
On the extended,
It needs to
this
be
is 25 feet, but this
I
is.
see.
pushed over.
I see.
But I'd like to make a recommendation for the motion.
Hold on a question. The shape you're talking about, that you're suggesting is 2 in line, not 1 in a T?
Well, that's up to us to discuss.
So that's not written here, so I wanna make sure.
Why would we get involved in that? If they met the criteria, if they were
Right.
25 feet off the property line,
Yeah,
if they wanted to do an L with two 50-footers, so what? I mean, that's their prerogative. They're within the 25 feet on both sides of their property
They
line.
could do an L.
And they're not exceeding 100 square feet. I don't think we should get involved in telling them how to lay it out.
so they could actually come out and put it 5 feet from shore.
Yes, and then put the L
I don't
if they
know.
wanted.
But that would require another application based on this, because what we're saying here is that they can go out straight.
Out 2 sections,
which is
I'm
fine.
happy to have an amendment to the motion.
But why don't we do it just, Mary, why don't we do your motion the way it is? And if they decide they like it, they can. If they wanna change it, they can come back with another application. It's a floating dock. It can be, we're not really up against a, time deadline here. They could do it for March 15th.
You don't just gotta put the, well, you can put the augers in the.
It would be easier to make, as I understood from Monica, the changes when there is water in the dock and it floats up and they can take those augers out. And yeah,
Full lake.
yeah, well, not totally full, but at least float and start to float.
Mary, was there any explanation as to why they just dropped this thing in and didn't?
They didn't know, they were
Understand.
not aware, they're relatively new to the lake, she was lovely, they're relatively new to the lake. And they were unaware of the standard guidelines.
It's gotta be, so it's this,
So we have a motion on the table,
Yes,
okay,
and make a friendly amendment.
friendly amendment.
That they, bring it into compliance by the end of March.
Okay, thank you.
Was this here we go again, with line and L on the end of your dock? Or a T?
Feet high.
Jesus, don't we just live?
Yeah,
Right there with you.
okay.
So do we have a second?
Wait, one quick question on that amendment. The only thing is that defeats, when there's water there, the dock is up level. And then they stick the augers straight down. Right now, the dock's lying at the bottom of the lake, so it's hard, you're going in on an angle.
Right, but by the time before the end of March, it's gonna be up to that, normally would be.
I think they said they wanted to do it with water, so.
Yes, and that's why I gave them to the end of March instead of March 15th.
If
Water may not be up.
we have water.
Well,
I mean,
normally
Guys.
it is by that time. You wanna put it the end of
We don't
April,
need to
that's
burn a lot of
fine.
fuel.
I just gotta give my deadline.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so what are we doing? The amendment is coming, the compliance by the end of March, right?
yes, with compliance, the end of it, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So do we have a second for this motion? We have a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? I abstain.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you.
I'll deliver the news. They may come back and want to discuss it.
Mike, are you gonna debrief on the POS meeting on the list?
No, not now, no. So, okay, is there anything else on our agenda that we need to, address urgently before we, go into executive session? Okay, with that said, we will exit the public.
I move we go into executive session.
All right, second, all in favor, aye, so moved. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Good job. Thank you.
So I'm going to stop recording. All right, we're back in executive session. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn,
Out of executives.
or we're out of executive session.
Motion to adjourn.
Second, third,
Second.
fourth.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Wait, we have to go cancel the meeting now.
All right, we're out.
Mike, I will not be here, I'm out of town. next
Aye,
week.
aye, aye. Aye, 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 aye.
Now we gotta adjourn the meeting.
Now we gotta adjourn the meeting.
No, we did adjourn.